So, Avengers Endgame, the culmination of 22 movies and 11 years of Marvel Cinematic Universe action, has finally hit theaters. And boy does it deliver. It's 3 hours of pure, unadulterated, and truly epic comic book action. And Marvel Studios really did pack a lot into those 3 hours. So much was packed into it, in fact, that it was quite easy to miss a lot of those Easter eggs, callbacks, nods, and minor inclusions that the MCU is known for. But never fear, we've got your back. In this video, we'll take you through 30 things you might have missed in Avengers Endgame. And be aware, this one is definitely going to contain Endgame spoilers. Let's start with something that wasn't in Avengers Endgame. That might seem strange, but it's worth pointing out, because for months in the build-up to the movie, fans were assuming that Tony Stark's
binarily augmented retroframing, or BARF, God, I gotta work on that acronym,
she would play a big part, and they assumed so with good reason, as it was seen written on a prop in a photograph from the movie's set. It was first seen in 2016's Captain America Civil War, but its absence in Endgame just proves that Marvel Studios likes to trick us. We bet you'd probably forgotten that it was strongly expected to appear in the movie. Avengers Endgame opened with the heartbreaking scene of Clint Barton's whole family turning to dust before his eyes on the Barton family's remote farm. Clint's wife is famously played by ER and Scooby-Doo star Linda Cardellini, but less is known about the child actors who portray the couple's kids. It may come as a surprise to you, therefore, to learn that Ava Russo, daughter of Endgame director Joe Russo, played Clint's daughter Lila Barton. She was the girl Clint was training to use a bow and arrow in that opening scene. When we were first reintroduced to Thanos at the start of Avengers Endgame, he was on the same farm we saw him on at the end of Avengers Infinity War, which Nebula confirmed was a place called the Garden. With his mighty golden armor acting as a scarecrow to protect his crops, the Mad Titan was wearing a humble rag, which appeared to be a nod to his simple clothing at the end of the Infinity Gauntlet comic book arc. Although not identical to what Thanos was wearing in the comics, it was certainly similar enough to have quite obviously been influenced by it. When the surviving Avengers confronted Thanos at the Garden, before Thor cut his head off, he also cut his hand off. In case you've forgotten, this is actually a recurring theme in the MCU, with the purpose of it being a nod to Star Wars.
If you only knew the power of the dark side.
The likes of Bucky Barnes, Aldrich Killian, Ulysses Klaue, and Groot have all lost appendages in the franchise. And in Avengers Endgame, Thanos continued that theme. In fact, Bruce Banner also lost the use of his arm when he reversed the snap, so that also continues the theme to a lesser extent. When Steve Rogers was running a support group for survivors of the decimation, director Joe Russo's cameo as the MCU's first openly gay man, talking about his first date in 5 years, was an easy one to spot. But there was a less obvious cameo in that same scene, in the form of Jim Starlin, who was playing another participant in the group who asked Russo's character about his date. Starlin is a comic book writer and artist, who happens to be responsible for the creation of Thanos, as well as characters like Drax the Destroyer, Gamora, and Shang-Chi. Fans have been speculating about how Paul Rudd Scott Lang would escape the quantum realm, since he got stuck in there at the end of last year's Ant-Man and the Wasp, and all was revealed in Avengers Endgame. The quantum tunnel van that took him to the quantum realm in the first place had been sent to a storage facility in San Francisco, where 5 years later, a rat activated the tunnel by crawling over some buttons. The number of the specific lockup it was stored in was 616, a reference to the designated name of the main universe in Marvel's comic books. Speaking of that storage facility in San Francisco, the security guard who let Scott Lang out of there was a well-known star in disguise, none other than Ken Jeong. His Community co-star Yvette Nicole Brown also appeared in Avengers Endgame, but her cameo was more easily identifiable. She was in the elevator with Steve Rogers and Tony Stark back in the 1970s. Rather interestingly, Jeong's character was reading a collection of J.G. Ballard's short stories called Terminal Beach. One of the stories within that volume happened to be a little number called Endgame, which is obviously no coincidence. In this year's Captain Marvel movie, and indeed at the start of Avengers Endgame, Brie Larson's Carol Danvers had shoulder-length hair. When Endgame jumps forward 5 years, and we see Danvers talking to Natasha Romanoff from space via some kind of holographic communication device, she's clearly had a haircut, which she's still rocking when she makes her grand entrance in the movie's epic final battle. If you're not familiar with the comic books, you might be interested to know that it's actually the signature look of the modern Captain Marvel from the source material. In the scene when Natasha was talking to the hologram of Carol Danvers, she was also talking to Rocket, Rhodey, Nebula, and Okoye, all of whom are reporting from their missions. Okoye notably mentioned the fact that there had been huge seismic activity on the ocean floor, but her plan of action to deal with it was to do nothing, because that wasn't their job. Could this have been a hint at the existence of Namor? We've already seen an Atlantis Easter egg in 2010's Iron Man 2. Maybe Okoye didn't feel the need to deal with ocean issues because she knew Namor would. One of the coolest moments in Avengers Endgame came when Tony Stark arrived at the Avengers compound with the news that he'd figured out time travel. He pulled up in his sports car and was greeted by Steve Rogers, who Tony proceeded to surprise by returning his iconic vibranium shield to him, which he'd taken in 2016's Captain America: Civil War. As he handed the shield over, a familiar piece of music played in the background, and that was the theme music from Captain America: The First Avenger, Cap's first solo outing in the MCU from back in 2011. Avengers Endgame revealed that the surviving Asgardians had set up a new home in Tonsberg, Norway called New Asgard. Tonsberg has a history in the MCU. It was the site of the Frost Giants' defeat against Odin's armies, as well as the town where the Red Skull found the Tesseract. In the comics, Asgard has floated above Oklahoma, and in an alternate Marvel Comics universe, New Asgard was the name of a version of Asgard that merged with New York City. So this wasn't a new idea. In fact, it could lead to an adaptation of the epic Siege story arc in the MCU. At the start of Avengers Infinity War, Tony Stark mentioned that Ben & Jerry's had named a flavor of ice cream after him, which Doctor Strange said was rather chalky, prompting Wong to reveal that his favorite flavor was Hulka Hulk Burning Fudge. In Avengers Endgame, in a scene showing some of the remaining Avengers sharing meals, there was a shot of Bruce Banner diving into a massive tub of the dessert, showing that, like Wong, he too is a fan of the Hulk-inspired creation. When Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, and Scott Lang traveled back to 2012's Battle of New York, we saw the aftermath of that iconic battle. Rogers entered an elevator with the Hydra strike team in it, including Brock Rumlow and Jack Rowlands. But rather than a repeat of the awesome elevator fight from 2014's Captain America: The Winter Soldier, he avoided conflict by whispering "Hail Hydra" into Jasper Sitwell's ear, pretending to be a Hydra agent. This was a fun nod to the Secret Empire comic book storyline, when Rogers uttered the same phrase to reveal he'd been a Hydra agent all along. While they were in New York, the heroes altered the events that occurred there, enabling Loki to escape with the Tesseract. What you might not realize is that there could be repercussions to that in the main MCU. Tony Stark said time travel rules aren't like Back to the Future, so altering the past won't change the main timeline. Yet when Steve Rogers went back in time, he aged within the main timeline. Essentially, that Loki TV series could still end up taking place in the main MCU timeline. The Stan Lee cameo in Avengers Endgame, which was likely his last one, unless the late great comic book icon filmed one for Spider-Man: Far From Home, was particularly joyous. It occurred in the 70s time jump, with Lee playing a de-aged hippie version of himself, driving past the military base with a female friend, proclaiming to them that they should make love, not war. On the back of his car was a bumper sticker that read "Nuff Said," his second most famous catchphrase after Excelsior. The reason for that 70s time jump was so Tony Stark and Steve Rogers could obtain both the Tesseract and some Pym particles in one fell swoop. But given that Rogers would have been recognized at the place called the birthplace of Captain America, he had to wear a disguise. The disguise included a shirt with the word Rosco on it, which in the comic books was the name of the man who replaced Rogers as Captain America when the hero was going by the name Nomad. While he was at the military base in the 70s, Steve Rogers distracted the young Hank Pym with a prank phone call that made him leave his laboratory in a rush. That allowed Rogers to sneak in and steal a few vials of Pym particles, which would allow him and Tony Stark to return to the present. When the camera panned around inside the lab, just prior to Pym rushing out, we were treated to the sight of an early prototype AntMan Helmet, which just so happened to be the classic Silver Age AntMan Helmet from the comic books. Tony Stark got to chat with his father about fatherhood in that same military base scene. And as Howard got in his car at the end of the scene, a certain actor made a very notable cameo. It was James D'Arcy playing Jarvis, Howard's loyal household butler, reprising his role from the Agent Carter television series. What was particularly notable about this cameo is that in making it, D'Arcy became the first ever actor whose MCU debut was on the small screen to appear in an MCU movie. The epic final battle in Avengers Endgame began with Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, and Thor confronting Thanos outside the Avengers HQ, and it didn't start too well for the trio. Thanos got the upper hand on the heroes, even breaking Cap's shield in exactly the same way it was broken in Tony Stark's vision in 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron. Thanos also broke the shield in a similar fashion in the Infinity Gauntlet comic book arc, when Rogers stood against him alone. In a movie crammed with epic moments, arguably the most epic came when Captain America finally wielded Mjolnir in the MCU, Thor's original weapon. We'd seen him budget in Avengers Age of Ultron, but most of us just assumed that was its way of saying you're the closest to being worthy out of everyone. But however, when he summoned it in Avengers Endgame, Thor said, "I knew it," which suggests he actually had been worthy all along, and simply chose not to pick it up in Age of Ultron to make Thor feel better about himself. Avengers Infinity War had that cool scene in which Black Widow, Okoye, and Scarlet Witch teamed up against Proxima Midnight, but Avengers Endgame went one better. During the epic final battle, Captain Marvel was trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet into Scott Lang's van, with Spider-Man commenting on how difficult it would be, what with Thanos' whole army in her way. Shuri, Nebula, Pepper Potts, and her rescue armor, Okoye, Valkyrie, Mantis, Gamora, the Wasp, and Scarlet Witch all joined forces to assist her, which is surely a foreshadowing of an all-female MCU team movie in the future. In last year's Ant-Man and the Wasp, Hope Van Dyne smirked sarcastically when Scott Lang referred to Captain America as Cap, suggesting he was great friends with the Avengers leader. There was a funny nod to that scene in Avengers Endgame, when Lang and Van Dyne were tasked with getting the Quantum Tunnel back online during the final battle. Captain America gave them their instructions, and Hope replied, "We're on it, Cap," which is followed by her and Scott Lang sharing a meaningful look, followed by a smile. Tony Stark's funeral was a who's who of MCU stars, with everyone from Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne to Maria Hill and General Ross in attendance. But there was also a teenage boy who you might not have realized was an MCU character we were introduced to back in 2013's Iron Man 3, Ty Simpkins' Harley Keener. Simpkins has changed dramatically, so it was very easy to think, who the heck was that? In addition to the likes of Lila Barton and Cassie Lang, Keener's presence in Endgame certainly seems to suggest that young Avengers seeds are being planted in the MCU. Following Tony Stark's funeral at the end of Avengers Endgame, Jon Favreau's Happy Hogan, one of Tony's best friends, can be seen sitting with Tony's daughter Morgan outside the Stark family home. Happy asks Morgan if she's hungry, telling her he'll get her any food she wants. When she asks for a cheeseburger, Happy tells her how her father loved cheeseburgers, which is actually a cool nod to the first Iron Man movie from 2008. If you recall, when Tony Stark first arrived home after being held captive in Afghanistan, the first thing he asked for was an American cheeseburger. Thor's future in the MCU was hinted at when Avengers Endgame came to an end, as he joined the Guardians of the Galaxy in their ship, ready to head off into space for more cosmic adventures with Rocket, Groot, and company. The God of Thunder made a pun, calling the team the Asgardians of the Galaxy, which is actually the name of a real team in Marvel's comic books. The roster is very different in the comics. Angela, Thunderstrike, Scourge, the Destroyer, and Throg make up the team. This isn't something anyone would have been able to see in Avengers Endgame, but it's a notable point that you probably missed. You know how Steve Rogers went back in time to place all the Infinity Stones back in the exact places that they were taken from at that exact moment they were taken? In the case of the Soul Stone, that would mean taking it back to the exact moment it manifested on Vormir, which was immediately after Natasha Romanoff's death. So, rather horrifyingly, Steve Rogers would have arrived on Vormir to be greeted by the corpse of one of his best friends, and his oldest foe, the Red Skull. Just before Steve Rogers went back in time, he told Bucky Barnes not to do anything stupid in his absence. Bucky's humorous reply was to ask him how he could possibly do anything stupid when Steve was taking all the stupid with him. This was actually a cute callback to an exchange that took place in 2011's Captain America: The First Avenger, just before Steve met Abraham Erskine for the first time. The only difference was that it was said in reverse, with Bucky telling Steve not to do anything stupid and Steve firing back with the same witty retort. When Steve Rogers went back in time, he was expected to return to the same spot in 5 seconds. That didn't happen, as Rogers opted to stay in the past with Peggy Carter, but he did return. An elderly Rogers who'd lived happily for more than 70 years with Peggy had made his way to a bench a few yards away, where he handed Sam Wilson his shield in another nod to the comics. He was wearing a tan jacket, which appeared to be the same one he wore when he was still the skinny kid from Brooklyn in Captain America: The First Avenger. At the end of Avengers Endgame, we finally got to see Steve Rogers dancing with Peggy Carter. It was a satisfying moment and a fitting end for Captain America's MCU arc. As the happy couple danced, a song was playing that you might have recognized. It was It's Been a Long, Long Time, which was featured in 2014's Captain America the Winter Soldier soundtrack. The song features lyrics that are really appropriate for the situation, and if you're interested, the version that features an Endgame seemed to be the version with Kitty Callan on vocals and the Harry James Band. MCU movies are known for their post-credits scenes, and Avengers Endgame was expected to provide us with another. However, there wasn't one, which really felt like Marvel Studios was trying to emphasize the end of an era. But there was something. A clanging noise could be heard, which was actually the noise Tony Stark made when he forged his very first armor in 2008's Iron Man. Essentially the sound of the Big Bang that launched the MCU. What it meant is anybody's guess. It could just be a respectful nod, or maybe it's hinting that we haven't really seen the last of Iron Man. Did you catch any of these things in Avengers Endgame? Did we miss anything that we should have included here? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Screen Rant for more great videos just like this one. Bye for now.